Morning, everyone. Welcome to our to the Tuesday, January 25th, 2022 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Plan Workshop. In accordance with Government Code Section 54953E, this meeting will be conducted by webinar and teleconference only. A physical location has not been provided for this meeting. All directors, including myself, are participating remotely. Please call roll, Madam Secretary.
Director Coleman,
Present.
Director Katz,
Present.
Director McIntosh,
Here.
Director Mellon,
Present.
Director Patterson,
Present.
Director Young,
I'm here.
President Lenny.
Here. All right. If members of the public wish to speak on an agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard at the beginning of the workshop. Comments on the workshop presentation will be heard at the end of the presentation. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Please refrain from providing personal information such as addresses or phone numbers during public comment. If we need this information, we'll have you contact staff. The secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have the discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. The secretary will track the time and inform each speaker when the allotted time has concluded. Do we have any speakers on non-agenda items? In other words, not on this workshop?
We have no speakers at the moment.
Okay. Then the comment for non-agenda items is now closed. And Clifford, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, President Lenny. So good morning, board members. At today's workshop, we're going to present our draft Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Plan. We have shared elements of the plan with you throughout the past year and did present the draft plan to the Legislative Human Resources Committee on January 11th, and we've incorporated their feedback in the plan that you see here today. This is a 5-year plan that includes a 2-year action plan. The work to develop the plan involved hundreds of employees and was also informed by many reports and studies. Getting to this point is a significant milestone, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to be done. In many ways, the hard work is about to begin. Derry Moten and his team will walk you through the plan and the 5 strategic pillars that frame the goals, objectives, and actions of the plan. At the end of each pillar, we'll pause to answer questions and get feedback from the board. Based on your feedback, we'll update the plan and hope to bring the final plan back to you in February for adoption. So at this point, I'll hand it off to Derry to begin the workshop.
General Manager, hello board. We're going to step right into the presentation today. To begin with, let's go to the opening slide. Or do I have control? Great. Okay, great. So the agenda for today is we'll take you through an overview of the development process and the principles that have gone into this. We'll talk about the vision, mission, and the commitments that we have at the individual and the organizational level that we're interested in. We'll talk about strategic pillars and the action plan, which, as was mentioned before, we have a full strategic plan. We have 5-year objectives that are built into that plan. We have 2-year action plans, which are based on key desired outcomes that we have for the plan on a whole. We'll talk about next steps and then open up for your feedback at the very end here. So today, what you'll be hearing from, who you'll be hearing from is our presenters. These are team members from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture. Myself, you'll have information from Chad Thigpen, Steve Curry, Jaisha White, Beverly Johnson, and Janella Sambor-Wallace. Each of them are in one of our 3 divisions in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture, and they all have some levels of responsibility in implementation of the plan, as you'll hear later on today. So our strategic approach to this has been trying to ground our development of the strategic plan and the work that we're doing on 3 key principles. And number 1 is about employee involvement and engagement. So part of the work that was done initially here has been to, again, gather information from employees, to put together a series of employee work teams, that are both involved in this effort and in other efforts that are employee-driven. We'll be using equity tools throughout our process. The equity tools are really the foundation of the approach to addressing equity issues, which are founded in some foundational questions, which are recorded in the plan that you've received. And then the second thing is a recognition that this is not a one-time activity, that we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of things that we have to continue to improve upon. And so really thinking about not just the actions that we're taking over the next several years, but really having a mind about continuous improvement overall, that we have to continue to improve. Just as from a personal aside here is that, the work of diversity and the work of inclusion has been work that I could say that my grandparents worked on years ago. It's work that I will work on and work that will be done when I'm gone. So I think continuing to recognize that we have to continue and improve is a foundational element of our strategy that we have to work on. So our strategic plan process has been founded in a 5-step approach here, which really is a continuous process. Number one, we conducted current state assessments, and we'll give you more details about what that looked like. Next, number 2 was about looking at and continuing to determine our vision, mission, and commitments that we need to make, working on determining a DEI governance model, implementing our strategies as we continue to look at the actions that we're going to take, and then also making sure that an ongoing element of evaluation is part of what we do, which should lead us back into then, again, conducting more current state assessments. So that should be a cycle that we continue to work through, not just now for the development of the plan, but ongoing in our DEI programming. So we have 7 data sources which make up our current state assessment. We began with our EBMUD demographics. Those demographics are some of the data that you receive in your annual affirmative action report, and then expanded into other areas. We have the board resolutions that were developed specifically around the murder of George Floyd, around anti-AAPI sentiment, and also how we deal specifically with supporting the LGBTQIA community. We then had the Winters Group cultural audit, which took a lot of the data that was in our demographics, but also looked and provided several surveys that went out to all staff, one-on-one interviews, focus groups, and other data that they included in order to come to a state, a look at us as a culture. When we went through the Winters Group data, we also identified that there were several groups that had not been adequately addressed in the focus group process. So we did some internal focus groups using a third-party facilitator, but we hosted additional focus groups to make sure that those groups had voice in the data that we received. We then had the Women in the Trades environmental scan, the Gender Expression and Identity Initiative, which was initiated by our Reigning Pride affinity group. And we also had employee and board feedback. And again, as we've been making presentations and documenting those things, the board has been responding to us with. And also we most recently had a series of sessions with employees, which are part of our affinity groups, to ensure that they were able to look at the plan and provide additional feedback in terms of what our implementation looks like. So our vision for diversity, equity, and for DEI overall is really, number one, that the workforce reflects diversity of the communities that we serve. All employees, contractors, and customers are valued, included, and have a voice in our long-term success. And a person's identity does not determine their outcomes or their successes. And then our mission really is to cultivate diversity, advance equity, and work inclusively. So with those items, there comes vision and mission are really only words until we can make some commitments. And so those commitments ideally rest at the individual level, that we ask every employee to, number one, appreciate each other's differences. We don't want to be colorblind. We actually want to see difference. We want to actually appreciate that difference and be able to work with that difference. The other thing is we need everybody to continue to learn and grow. That again, recognizing there's something we need to learn from each other, things we need to learn in general, and then also being willing to support each other. Those three commitments are key to our work going forward. And then our organizational commitments come down to number one, an acknowledgement that bias and racism exists both at the individual and systemic levels. Number two, that we are open to cultivating dialogue about DEI issues. Number three, that we're focused on embedding DEI into our district values. Number four is promote intentional inclusivity and cultural competency. We want to build an environment that is our focus. And then applying an equity lens to all our business operations. So our governance model engages over 230 employees and external partners in the district's DEI programming. This begins with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture in our 3 divisions. And we have 5 employee-driven groups that are all part of our overall governance here, which is our Contract Equity Advisory Committee, our Diversity Committee, our affinity groups, the Equity Core Team, and the Values Advocates, and then one external advisory in our Contract Equity External Advisory Council. So when it comes to this work, the key element that we'll be using is the work of using equity toolkits, which are both products and processes which are used to operationalize equity. And the foundation of an equity toolkit is to look at any project or look at anything that we're working on and ask 4 basic questions. And number one, who benefits and who's burdened by what we're looking at or what we're planning to do? Who's missing from the conversation in terms of planning or implementation? What is our metrics and how will we know when we're being successful, and how we know, again, who's impacted, so the data that we're collecting or working with. And then finally, how do we address or mitigate any negative or reverse unintended consequences? In other words, recognition that there can exist bias in any environment, and recognizing that, then when we make decisions, are there any unintended consequences that we would have in those, and if we plan for what the mitigation is and how we will work with those things going on. Those are the factors that make up equity. And the reason we introduce this equity toolkit now is that as you look at the rest of the plan, you'll hear references to us using equity toolkits in a lot of the work that we're planning. So our implementing the DEI strategic pillars here, there are 5 that comprise the work that we're looking at. Number 1 is our leadership commitment, our workforce diversity, our inclusive culture, supplier diversity, and social responsibility. So these 5 pillars are how we have categorized the work that we're doing in the plan. We then have 11 goals, 36 objectives, 2-year actions that are roughly 114 actions that are planned in the plan. And we have 23 of those actions currently in process right now. So we are both in the planning process, but also we're implementing as we're planning. Many of those items still are reflective of work that was done in the Racial Equity and Justice project. So what you're going to see today is our strategic plan broken out into 2 layers. As each presenter comes up, they're going to present to you a slide that will provide a strategic goal, a list of the objectives and the key desired outcomes. They will then drill into the 5-year objectives to give you items that we have on our 2-year action plan. So in the 2-year action plan, what you'll see is an objective that corresponds to the objectives, and then you'll see the actions that we have planned for that. These actions have been truncated for the slides, but in your report, you have the full list of those actions available to you. So I'm going to turn this over to Chad Thigpen, who's a senior HR analyst in the Employee and Organizational Development Division. He's going to introduce you to our first strategic pillar, which is leadership commitment.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to present the first pillar, which Steri mentioned has to do with leadership commitment. The focus and goal of this pillar is for all EBMUD leaders to make it a priority to take responsibility in accomplishing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI goals. When DEI is considered when managing and overseeing operations, they will be seen as part of leading the cultural change. Next slide, please. So there are 3 strategic goals related to leadership commitment. The first goal focuses on leadership commitment and accountability, and it has 2 5-year objectives. The first five-year objective is about leadership competency and is about building skills with regard to creating a culture of inclusion and educating all employees about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and their impact on the organizational success. The second objective is about DEI accountability and developing measures so that we can determine the progress we are making towards organizational DEI practices and performance. If we accomplish both of these objectives, then the district's leaders will be taking responsibility for building a diverse and inclusive organization and effectively address inequities when identified. Next slide, please. So here is a listing of actions for the objective of leadership competency under this strategic goal. The first action is about developing DEI competencies that align with and support an inclusive workforce. The second action has to do with our group, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture, researching options for using a self-assessment related to cultural competency and emotional intelligence that could be used as part of a training program or action planning to reinforce strengths and close skill gaps. We are currently considering this for a new course that we are planning on offering about cultural competency. The third one is about providing cultural competency, racial and diversity and inclusion training and development opportunities for all employees, and this is already underway. As I mentioned, we are currently planning on offering some training opportunities. We actually have 3 training opportunities that are going to be taking place in the next several months. And then the last one is about including inclusive leadership practices and a culture of engagement leadership assessment in all the manager and supervisor training programs and/or content. We currently have an inclusive leadership series in place, and we plan to offer a training on inclusive leadership this spring. Next slide, please. This is a listing of actions that will be part of the second objective concerning DEI accountability. The first one established is that our department, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture, will be guiding the DEI work for the district. The second action concerns incorporating DEI competencies into performance plans for managers and supervisors. These are competencies I mentioned in the first objective of the strategic goal. The last 2 are critical with regard to measuring results. The third action item is focused on developing DEI metrics. Specifically, we would identify metrics for talent acquisition, talent development, workplace culture, and contract equity. The fourth action item has to do with creating a DEI dashboard, which would include the DEI metrics identified to track the progress being made in these areas. These last 2 are going to be critical to measuring results, which I know is very important for the organization and the directors. Let's move on to the next goal, which has to do with organizational processes. This also has 2 5-year objectives. The first 5-year objective is about developing an equity toolkit and equity lens guidelines that are specific to the district. The second objective is about implementing and using the equity toolkit to review district policies and procedures, budget planning, processes for external policy proposals, and departmental planning. If we accomplish both of these objectives, we will eliminate systemic barriers to equity for all employees, vendors, suppliers, customers, and ratepayers. Next slide, please. So these are the actions for the first objective of the second strategic goal. The first action is about developing an equity toolkit for the district. And this is what Derry was referring to earlier, to apply equity principles across all areas of the district's DEI strategic plan. The second action item focuses on engaging the equity core team as equity strategists and leading their departments on implementing the district's equity toolkit. The third action item involves our department, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture, providing education and guidance for various departments on implementing an equity toolkit. And the last item has to do with reviewing and implementing third-party recommendations for human resources policies and civil service rules. Next slide, please. So these are the actions for the second objective of the second strategic goal. It focuses on implementing the equity toolkit, which entails reviewing processes, conducting research, and developing processes. The first action item, which has already been implemented, involves reviewing internal audit forms and processes and looking for ways to integrate an equity lens or language. The second action item is about researching equity-based budgeting practices. The third is about researching equity-based processes for external policy proposals. So this includes external actions like the legislative analysis process, but also regulations, guidance, strategic plans, and policies. And the last item involves developing a process for determining community impacts from district projects and operations and ensure that affected, underrepresented communities' input is included in the decision-making process. So this would entail developing measures of success with regard to the impact on the community during the planning of the operational projects that impact the communities. Next slide, please. So this is the third and last strategic goal for this pillar, and it focuses on performance management, and it also has 2 5-year objectives. The first 5-year objective is about improving the performance management process for all employees and create opportunities for enhancing employee engagement, employee relationships, and productivity. The second objective is about the discipline process and creating a clear, equitable, and accountable process for disciplinary actions with an emphasis on restoring an employee to productivity. If we accomplish both of these objectives, we will ensure that our performance management processes are bias-free and designed and executed to align and maximize our employees' performance with the goals of the organization. Next slide, please. So this is a listing of actions for the first objective in the third strategic goal, and it has to do with the performance management process. The first action item involves researching online performance management systems with the goal to optimize and streamline the performance management process. The second item is about establishing consistent performance management expectations for managers and employees. The third action entails developing an internal support system to provide proactive guidance to managers on how to serve as success coaches to address and correct behaviors and how to approach employees with critical performance improvement conversations. And then lastly, our goal is to enhance current management training on how to give fair, unbiased, and objective performance evaluations. Next slide, please. And this is a listing of actions for the second and final objective of the third strategic goal dealing with the discipline process. First, we'll monitor current disciplinary actions to identify patterns to ensure that similar violations receive equitable discipline. Second, we'll research best practices regarding progressive discipline. And lastly, we'll take these items into consideration as we are documenting and improving the existing processes for implementing performance improvement plans to help employees improve and get back on track. And that concludes the presentation for this pillar. We have a couple of minutes for any questions or feedback.
Any questions from board members? can't see anyone, so if you have anything, speak up. Otherwise, get on to pillar 2. Thanks, Chad.
Okay. So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Stephen Curry, to walk you through the second strategic pillar on workforce diversity.
Thanks, Chad. Our second strategic pillar, pillar 2, workforce diversity. Through this pillar, intentional and focused effort is made to attract and retain applicants from diverse and underrepresented groups. The goal is to achieve and maintain a workforce that is equitably representative across levels and functions. There are 2 strategic goals related to this pillar. On the slide, you'll see the first of these. Strategic goal 4 is talent acquisition, bringing in diverse external talent. You'll see there are a half dozen 5-year objectives for this strategic goal, and all of which share the key desired outcome of a highly talented and diverse workforce that represents the demographics of our communities. The 6 5-year objectives are hiring and recruitment pilot project, which is objective 4.1. Also diversity recruiting, outreach and marketing, learning and knowledge building, DEI competencies and hiring, continuous improvement, and entry-level career opportunities. 4.1 is the pilot project group, which has already started assessing systemic DEI issues related to hiring and recruitment as part of the DEI planning process, and will continue this work over the next 2 years. Objective 4.2 on the next slide is, there we go. 4.2 is diversify recruiting, outreach, and marketing efforts. This objective is focused on expanding and enhancing things that we've already started doing around diversity outreach, focusing on community partnerships like Cypress Mandela, Civic Corps, Rising Sun, JVS, and Goodwill, as well as various community colleges, Peralta, Laney, Merritt, and Los Banos College, among others. It's also about leveraging employees, retirees, and our affinity groups to attract diverse talent to the organization. Finally, we're going to continue expanding our use of social media and other tools. Objective 4.3 on the next slide is about learning and knowledge building. Over the next 2 years, we'll be helping our hiring managers with hiring and recruitment process by providing enhanced work tools and training. The next objective is 4.4, which is about cultural competence and emotional intelligence in hiring. We want to make sure that over the next 2 years that we're recruiting and hiring people who have cultural competency, emotional intelligence, and a growth mindset. We'll be developing DEI-informed interview, reference, and supplemental questions to help with this. Objective 4.5 under talent acquisition is continuous improvement. Over the next 2 years, we'll be conducting an external organizational assessment of hiring and recruitment policies, procedures, systems, and practices. And we'll also be developing a process that encourages candidates to correct and or provide additional information about their minimum qualifications before their candidacy is formally eliminated from further consideration. The last objective under strategic goal 4 talent acquisition is about expanding entry-level career opportunities. And this is something we've already started doing with a number of projects, including a new version of the Special Employment Program, the SEP program, which we're now calling the Community Trainee Program, being piloted through Grounds Maintenance, Crews, and Operations and Maintenance Department. Our Seasonal Ranger 1 recruitment, which will be coming up this spring for the summer. IT help desk interns, skilled trades internships. We'll also be looking over the next 2 years to develop an ongoing series of work-based learning events and programs to encourage diverse candidates to pursue district careers. The next goal for our workforce diversity pillar is strategic goal 5, talent development and mobility. This is about promoting, retaining, and developing our internal talent, our current employees. And the key desired outcomes for these four 5-year objectives are all about making sure all employees have equitable access to opportunities for development and promotion in both traditional and non-traditional career pathways. We'll go and look at each of these in detail. The first objective, 5.1, is promotion retention pilot project. And this pilot project, like the recruitment and hiring pilot project, has already started assessing systemic issues related to promotion and retention at the district as part of the diversity, equity, inclusion strategic planning process. And that group will continue this work over the next 2 years. Objective 5.2 is about improving and expanding equitable access to professional development resources and opportunities. The 2-year actions are really about engaging employees and helping each of them develop an individual career plan for themselves and then connect them with district resources to help them develop. Objective 5.3 on the next slide is workforce planning and development. Over the next 2 years, we'll be identifying classifications with limited career pathways, classifications like customer service rep, janitors, and recreation area attendants. And we'll identify opportunities for them to move across to alternative parallel career ladders within the district. We'll also be implementing our leadership academies, enhancing and expanding our existing and training programs to cultivate pools of potential candidates for future leadership opportunities. This includes our updated, expanding, enhancing MAST managers and supervisors training, our Pearl to Hope cohort program, and other projects. The final objective for talent development and mobility pillar is, the talent development and mobility strategic goal is objective 5.4, which is leveraging succession planning. Over the next 2 years, we'll be completing an environmental scan to prepare ourselves and our employees for the future workforce skill needs at the district. We'll design and develop programming to support employee preparation. That concludes the overview of the workforce diversity pillar. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Director Young?
Yeah, you mentioned that right now we're looking at, I think it was this part of the presentation, looking at the current situation in terms of, identifying, I don't know if weaknesses is the right word, but gaps or, potential problems in our current hiring process. With regard to this, and I'm wondering if you could expand on that. And then the second question I had is, what are the numbers that we're thinking about in terms of these programs to bring in, more, or make sure that we're reaching out to our, local population and, looking towards increasing the pathways that people can enter the organization from the communities we serve.
Yeah, in terms of looking at our hiring process, I think there's two objectives that address that. Well, the first one is the internal pilot project group, which is really looking at how do we get information about who's most impacted by our current hiring and recruiting processes, as well as our promotion and retention processes. And that group will really try to inform that work by talking to those groups that are most impacted. Our employees that are not promoting, our employees that are stuck in positions and have limited career pathways. Also diverse, talented folks outside the organization who are not being hired at the district, figuring out how do we, what are the barriers that they're finding in our hiring and recruitment processes. And then the second part is having, especially in regards to hiring and recruitment, is an assessment of our hiring, recruitment, and external assessment. of that by a third party, and getting some external assessment of what that what our best practices, what could we be doing, what are others doing to address this. In terms of the numbers that we're hoping to look at, all of that is usually informed primarily by our affirmative action program process, but we're looking to expand what we've historically done. Historically, we've looked at are we recruiting diversity at the same rate that exists in the community, in the broader workforce. We want to look at that because we know there are systemic issues that discourage women from pursuing STEM careers, that exclude other racial or other minority groups or people with disabilities or any number of diversity factors from pursuing certain types of careers. So we want to make sure we're encouraging that. We're working with community partners to expand that work and to help inform that work as well.
Yes, and to add to Steve's comment, this is where the linkage between Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 come into play in terms of the development of our DEI dashboard. Because one of the challenges that we have is often working with data that's a little old. So to have a data dashboard that is, again, better able to inform us of where we should be increasing outreach, what some of our outreaches are, what are the results of some of our outreach efforts, to be able to measure those much more real time, to make adjustments so that we don't miss opportunities by doing things that aren't bringing us the types of results that we want to have. So being able to have the dashboard much more to raise our efficiency and how we make adjustments, so that we can be looking at, again, as Steve mentioned, not only entry-level positions, but our outreaches to diversify professional level positions and other positions within the organization. Director Young, did that answer your?
Yeah, thank you. It doesn't answer the kind of numbers question, but that's okay. It seems like we're just dipping our toe in terms of setting, you've identified some job classifications, but that doesn't give me a good sense of, what we're hoping, where we're hoping to get to, or what our progression, what the progression could look like.
Okay.
If you know what I mean. And maybe that's just maybe that's a down the line piece, but I mean, we can do all this work, and if it doesn't change anything in real measurable terms, then we haven't really accomplished our objective, right? So
yes.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the demographics of our service area and the counties where we operate as a good baseline for where we want to head. We know we're not as diverse as the community in all aspects, and we need to do a better job of measuring that diversity and moving towards being as diverse as the community that we serve. So that baseline will change as the demographics in the counties change, and we'll need to continue to.
Yeah, and in the program Steve is mentioning, we have 12 current positions that are community trainee positions. So we're looking at how we deploy those and actually spread those across multiple disciplines within the district. So those will be the foundational ones we're working on in terms of the entry-level positions that we're working on. Yeah, Director Mellon.
So a couple of things. First of all, one of the things that I recall very heavily, and I'm leading to a point on this, is that oftentimes when folks have approached me about, oh, geez, I don't see a job in what I do at EBMUD, and my answer has been, go for a spot because you have the ability to move to other positions. But I didn't hear in this presentation that we keep an eye out for people that are doing that sort of thing so that we can move them through, because we're ignoring a talent pool if we aren't keeping an eye out for that. And then secondly, And this is a long-standing, ongoing issue that I've had with employers everywhere that I've been a consultant. Just because a title says this is the supervisor of widget management, okay, doesn't mean that you only look for people who have been supervisors of widget management. A manager is a manager is a manager. They may have to learn new vocabulary. They may have to learn, some of the culture of the organization. But I call to mind that famous example of the guy that was over at Boeing that went over to, I think it was General Motors or Ford. Yeah. You know, what does a guy in aircraft know about anything in automobiles? The answer is the person's a manager. And I didn't hear that kind of approach in what you were talking about, Stephen. And I think that needs to be fleshed out. Otherwise, those two things that I brought up, we're missing opportunities for diversity from within the organization because people have chosen to take a lesser job for the long game. So I'm thinking that there may be a little bit more here. And this is a great presentation, but I feel like there's a little piece missing.
Yeah, thank you, Director Millen. That's great feedback. Objective 5.3 was where we're trying to get at that. I might not have articulated that clearly. And certainly there's a lot more work that we need to do in that area, but it's identifying classifications with limited career pathways. It's really trying to expand and enhance internal career pathways. We've got some great ladders. When we look across other water and wastewater utilities, everyone's impressed by the ladders that we have for engineering, for pipeline repair and maintenance. The reality is there's only some ladders that are really clearly defined like that. For other folks, the ladder is more a career lattice where you may need to move to the side and find those transferable skills. We want that to happen both at the management level, but also at the contributor level. So, customer service is customer service. You don't have to have worked in, a water utility customer service department to come in and do a great job.
I'm looking at 5.3. That's the advantage of having a pad along with a computer. I can go back and forth easily. And what I'm talking about is something a little bit more than limited career paths. I'm talking about individuals who have opted to come in at a limited area so that they can then move beyond that. I don't know how to word that in the scope of this. I've worked with career ladders in a wide variety of industries, and they have a fuzzy edge to them, allowing for a lateral move to then get into an area that they're going. And I think that's what you're hinting at here. But the problem with things in writing, as we all well know, is sometimes they put edges on things that we intended to be more flexible. So I give you that as a caution for that particular area. I did read through all this. It's not an insomnia cure because this is my world. So I want to see how you're approaching my world. So thank you.
Thank you.
Director McIntosh.
Yes, thank you. It's a wonderful plan. I'm more concerned about internal candidates and their ability to move up. Here at the district, we just went through a really unfortunate situation with regards to an internal candidate being passed over, a candidate who this system is designed to help. So I've sort of become a non-believer in the last week. I understand there's a lot of work to still be done, but I tell you, I've just turned a corner here, and I hope this is not just jargon or rhetoric, and that we will see a real change, because we don't have that change right now. and it really concerns me. The other issue, I believe that the board should be apprised before 2 years or even a year. I mean, this is a board-driven resolution, and I think we should be privy to the results, the data, as we move forward. So I think that needs to be addressed. I understand there's plenty of work to be done, but I think the board should be apprised earlier than 2 years or even 1 year. I think we should have check-ins so we can track the results and see whether or not this program is working. Because if it's not working, we may need to do some tweaking. So those are my comments for now, but I am very disappointed in the district right now and its hiring processes and its interviewing processes. Very disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback. In the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and move to the next strategic pillar, and I thank you all for your feedback on this one. The next one is our strategic pillar number 3, inclusive culture, and we're going to have our senior analyst, Jaisha White, present information specific to this.
Okay, thank you everyone and good morning. I'm presenting on strategic pillar number 3, building an inclusive work culture. As Stephen presented on the strategies and actions we're taking to diversify our workforce, I think it's important that we acknowledge that while diversity and inclusion are related concepts, diversity by itself is not sufficient to building and maintaining a workforce in which everyone has a sense of belonging, feels they have a purpose, they're valued and empowered to have a voice and feel fully engaged in the successful fulfillment and advancement of the district's mission. Next slide, please. So for strategic goal number 6, there are 4 objectives, that fall underneath the goal of building a culture of belonging. And so the key desired outcomes for this particular strategic goal is to increase the number of employees who express they are experiencing a positive and inclusive work environment as measured by the employee feedback that we receive. Next slide, please. Action item 6.1 is specific to building an inclusive culture, and there are 4 action items that align with this specific objective. Action item 1, we will undertake reviewing and modifying policies related to potential violations of abusive conduct. We will also explore opportunities to enhance and expand trainings on the prevention of abusive conduct. We will also look at providing additional DEI-related training specific to building and promoting and fostering an inclusive, respectful workplace. And lastly, we will look at opportunities to update our employee recognition program and ensure that includes elements for individual and team-based recognition. 6.2 speaks to our need to ensure that our employee groups play a key role in building and maintaining and supporting an inclusive work environment. So one thing that we want to do is ensure that we boost and maximize the impact and effectiveness of our community groups by providing them leadership training specific to their roles and responsibilities as leaders in the community group, and also again expand that to other professional development opportunities, and also ensure that we're giving them platform and space to not only promote their own events, but also there's some cross collaboration in which they support each other's events. We're also currently exploring opportunities to form new affinity groups. I believe we have our DART disability. Okay, Janella, what is the name of the new DART stand for? I'm sorry, I just had a brain freeze. Well, it's our disability
Advocacy Rights Team.
Thank you. I knew the name had changed. So that is one of the new affinity groups that will become official early February. And another affinity group that's information is specific to women. Our next action item, we want to provide opportunities to engage our diversity committee and our equity core team and have them serve as strategic business partners on the advisement and education on all matters pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically providing training on their roles on the application of the equity toolkit. And our last action item for this objective is we want to explore options through the Values Advocate Program, in which we want to expand our values to include those which affirm our commitment to advancing DEI throughout the district. Objective 6.3 is specific to the Gender Expression and Identity Initiative. So another way that we can build an inclusive workforce by ensuring that we partner with Reigning Pride in implementing the recommendations that were provided in that Gender Expression and Identity Initiative. And that encompasses 3 action items for our 2-year plan. The first action item will look at exploring opportunities to allow employees and members of the public to provide the option of providing their pronoun usage or the lack thereof in all forms of written and personal communications. We're also going to work with HR in modifying our HRS system to ensure that it expands its options for gender identification and includes non-binary options, and also research and evaluate options for creating universal restrooms and changing facilities at our staffed district facilities and work sites. Objective 6.4 is specific to creating a culture that is conducive to work-life balance and harmony. So a lot of organizations are learning that offering a variety of work-life balance options enhances inclusion throughout the organization. So there's 4 action items that support this objective. The first action item is specific to developing tools, training, and resources that will integrate psychological safety, stress management, and wellness into our health and safety plan. We also want to explore opportunities on how we can expand our flexible work schedules and ensure that we embed equity and fairness in the review, in the approval and denying process. Also, the third step is we want to do further research with Paramount EAP to see what other services they're able to provide just beyond the standard crisis management services. And also we're currently, this is something that's underway, we're going to be engaging in conversations on looking at opportunities for providing on-site childcare at the district or providing subsidies for local childcare facilities. Okay, so our strategic goal number 7 is proactive EEO. And this has 4 items under this 5-year objective. And the key desired outcome is for EEO to have, is being proactive in addressing, EEO issues are addressed in a timely manner for impacted groups and ensuring those groups are restored to a sense of health, wellness, safety, and productivity. Next slide. Objective 7.1 is specific to the ADR process. So we're currently researching potential options to apply alternative dispute resolution to the district. The next action item will be defining the protocols for the various types of ADR. And the last action item for this objective is to implement an ADR pilot project, which includes providing options on how to resolve interpersonal issues and provide resources for employees who have been impacted by an EEO concern. Objective 7.2 is specific to EEO peer services. So, and it's 2 action items. The first, we want to research and create options, including providing trauma-informed support services and care for individuals and teams that are impacted by EEO concern. And the second action item is want to create a post-EEO follow-up assessment to be implemented after an investigation. 7.3, selection concurrence. And what this means, we want to ensure that EEO has a presence and a role throughout every phase of the recruitment life cycle from beginning to end. And that will entail 2 action items: providing training for all employees that are involved in the interview process, and that training can be included on understanding, Title VII, understanding the impacts and the various types of biases that inform and influence hiring decisions, and ensuring that each hiring panel is diverse in terms of all our different identities represented at the district. And the second is to develop and implement a pilot of concurrence process in which DEI reviews recruitment and selection materials throughout each phase of the recruitment lifecycle. Objective 7.4 has one action item, and this is specific to conducting external EEO investigations. So the action item is to convene an internal stakeholder meeting to develop a procedure on how to address potential EEO occurrences that involve employees and other external parties. Strategic goal number 8 is specific to our DEI communication strategy. And there's two objectives. And the key desired outcome is to ensure that we have a two-way dialogue throughout the organization on all matters germane to DEI. So 8.1 is developing the DEI communication plan, and there's 4 action items. So the first is currently underway. We're in the process of developing an inclusive language guide to educate employees on the importance of using inclusive language guide in the workplace. And what we want for employees to do is really be mindful of the language they're using and being thoughtful about that, and ensuring that they understand that language that is inclusive affirms our humanity, our diverse identities, and allows everyone to be seen how they want to be seen. The second action item is to launch an I Am DEI campaign. This campaign is designed to promote the Diverse Identities Act, EBMUD, but also educate employees with the understanding that DEI is for everyone, and we all have a role in moving this work forward. Action item number 3 is we were partnering with internal stakeholders on how to message DEI with our various internal employee platforms in a way that resonates and speaks to our diverse audiences. And the last action item is to develop an internal stakeholder engagement plan. And this will be to develop specific to developing DEI initiatives and to gather their feedback and input on how to move forward with those in implementing those initiatives. And the last objective for this strategic pillar is 8.2, employee feedback. And there's 3 action items. The first action item is to develop and implement a standardized exit interview process. And this is specific to employees that are voluntarily leaving through means of voluntary resignations, termination of a limited term assignment, or even people that are retiring. Action item number 2 is we want to conduct periodic stay interviews to capture the current employee experience and keep a pulse on that, and also maintain a central repository for being able to track and monitor trends and making sure that we keep a pulse on the employee experience at the district. And the last action item is we want to move forward we're in the process of conducting employee engagement and work climate surveys to measure employee perceptions and experiences specific to their working relationships and their contributions to building that inclusive culture here at the district. So we're at the conclusion of the presentation for strategic pillar number 3. So I will open the room up to any questions. Okay, I don't think that's okay.
Director Mellon.
Dr. Mellon.
Yeah, the idea of exit interviews has been awesome to find out what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. The problem is getting people to talk. I remember when I was at the district, we had a particular problem with a very high turnover in one department. We couldn't get anybody to talk. And finally, after cajoling, which is a terrible thing to have to do, finally got somebody to talk, and it turned out we had a potential workplace violence situation growing. And we had no idea. So while the exit interviews idea is a good one, I hope you can come up with a way to get people to talk. So, that's, and as far as the periodic stay interviews, it has another name and it slips me right now, but yeah, that's a very good idea. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong?
Mhm.
I encourage it.
Yes, we're
Thank
able to
you.
get more real-time feedback. With
Yeah.
the exit interviews, my experience is sometimes it's helpful to have a neutral party facilitate those so that people can open up. A lot of times if it's HR or the direct manager, I don't know who was the person that was the facilitate the interviews, but a lot of times that can be the barrier when they feel that there's no impartiality or neutrality in the process.
I agree with you. That's a tool, but we were highly unsuccessful in that one case. And I wound up using old negotiation tactics in order to try and get an answer. So I'm saying I agree with you. Exit interviews are an excellent tool. Leave yourself enough leeway as to other things, including, as you said, a third party to do the interview.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's great feedback for us to consider as we move forward. Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Yes, Director Patterson.
It appears to me that as I look through some of the key actions related to diversity and whatnot, number 5 becomes quite important to me because we're talking about internal talent and how we harness that, encourage it, refine it, and point it in the right direction. I have a feeling that people in this category, before you get to the 6, 7, and 8, if they sit too long without any action, that's a downgrade, so to speak, for your existing talent. In the first one, you're talking about bringing people on, some of whom have talent, and hire a little below where they should really rank. But 5 is everybody who's already in the district, who are performing well. And what is the recognition when you come to D&I and somehow they don't move or their talent isn't really recognized in their opinion. And that's where the sharing you talk about in the last category, being able to talk about that. Sometimes is a little difficult and may put them in a worse position if it's in terms of a complaint or misunderstanding, particularly if they occupy a key position and are performing well in it. So I just throw that out because I think over the years, the command performance really is on those persons who fill the management position and how well they're able to bring their staff along to meet the goals and objectives of not only D&I, but the agency. That's just a comment.
Okay, thank you, Director Patterson. Were you speaking specifically to the talent management goal?
No, I'm speaking to, well, yes, I am. It enhances that as well. Let me put it another way. I come out of a sports background. In our process, you learn from the coach. Coach is like a manager in a sense. Mm-hmm. And they're always improving on what a team does as a team. And they're always looking to individuals in that process who lead certain actions, who are key to certain actions. We often hear the expression of having a coach on the field or having a coach in the gym, so to speak, wherever the activity takes place. And to that degree is how I kind of look at staff and how they're viewed. Oftentimes, what we're looking for and what we get are not the same. And in D&I and moving toward really defined objectives, sometimes we have to move people in spite of the D&I, so to speak, who can handle the job and keep training and keep bringing out others to get to D&I. D&I in itself is not my goal. My goal is that everybody be counted, especially workers who perform well and given an opportunity. And I think the rest will adjust itself because your hiring, your intake, who you bring aboard, how many of whichever category we're looking at, that's where you get to pick from. That's going forward. That's where you have to pick from. Awful hard bringing somebody in over an existing staff that's been around for a long time. And you don't get credit for how long you've been here. It's what you do and what will benefit the organization. That's what people are making a decision about when they bring you into a new position.
Thank you, Director Patterson. Director McIntosh?
Yes, I'm interested in 7.3, training and the interview process.
Mm-hmm.
So my first question, how are interviewers chosen? I mean, who decides who's going to interview whom?
So you're talking about the screening process?
Yes. Who, if someone is up for a position, who are the interviewers? How are they chosen?
Or how are the interview panels chosen?
Yes.
So and I'll have Jerry speak to that since he probably has more experience on the interview panels at the district. My understanding is that usually the manager is selecting the hiring panel, is my understanding. So Jerry, do you want to
That's correct. If a hiring manager, a hiring manager's responsibility is to select their interview panel, which should be a minimum of 3 people, and it should be a diverse panel. They're also responsible for selecting individuals to do their application screening as well. And those should be subject matter experts who can identify skill sets as they read through applications.
So if we're talking about training in the interview process, let's start with the manager, him or herself. So it's totally within their discretion who sits on the panel. Correct.
And as you pointed out, that part of that is us in one of the earlier sections, where one of our planning points is to actually provide some additional supportive training specifically for hiring managers. And again, number one, how to conduct their outreaches, specifically with an eye towards diversity, selection of diverse panels. Also, we kind of talked specifically about development of test bank questions, specifically for, again, to identify diversity skill sets within individuals. So some of the training that we referenced in that section is specifically around those areas to make sure that hiring managers have that support and that they understand what they should be looking for as well.
All right.
Thank you, Director. I just want to also share that I also work for the community college system, and it's in their regulations that anyone that sits on a panel, whether you're a hiring manager or another peer from another organization, has to go through a training, and you take that training, I believe, every 2 or 3 years. just stay abreast and aware of the trends and practices for how to hire in a very inclusive and culturally responsive way. And also training is a constant reminder of how are we challenging our assumptions in that process when we have, confirmation bias, recency bias. So it goes through the different types of biases. What does that look like? And also it challenges us to look at ourselves through that equity lens, apply it to ourselves when we're looking at, when we're engaging with the interview candidates and things of that nature. So I recommend for all interview panelists to go through a training specific to understanding the biases, understanding the rules and regulations, understanding what constitutes a lawful and unlawful interview question. So I think it behooves all people invested in that process to be trained on it.
Thank you. I hope that's part of the process because that's what I was needing to hear, that there's going to be some cultural training involved in this because I think therein lies one of the huge problems already. And if somehow we can get past that, that would be a huge stepping stone. I just don't see it in our future. I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound like a wet blanket, but we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and getting to the bottom of the problem should be first and foremost. So thank you for that response.
Thank you for sharing. Okay. So I will now turn this over to my esteemed colleague, Beverly Johnson, who will now present on supplier diversity.
Good morning, everyone. And the district is a positive. I'm going to be talking to you about the strategic pillar 4, supplier diversity. The district is a positive leader in the local business community and even statewide, and promoting and encouraging and promoting underutilized firms in terms of who we contract with, as noted by the various awards we've received over the last 35 years. Pillar 4 is all about taking us to the next level. Could we, next slide, please? For strategic goal 9, which is contract and procurement, we have 4 objectives, and our desired outcome is to encourage and promote entrepreneurship, economic development, and underrepresented communities, in which in turn will create jobs, wealth, better health and education in those disadvantaged communities. What would success look like at the end of this process? Increased diversity in contract awards and upward movement in our 5-year average of contract awards, pretty much closing the gap between contracting objectives and our actual awards. Next slide, please. Since construction is typically the district's largest contract category, I will use it as my framework when talking about supplier diversity. Like all the other pillars, Pillar 4 is built upon the equity toolkit, which serves as a rebar for our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan. The rebar is what's going to build and give us the strength and stability for identifying and actually identifying our contracting inequities. Objective 9.2 is pretty much, we're going to be re-examining our communication aspects, materials we use, how they are delivered, as we develop our specs for moving from equality to equity in our contracting practices. Next slide, please. In our contract equity education, objective 9.3, once we have the specs on how we're going to be more inclusive in our contracting process, we have to go out and educate our business community, and going and doing that in a way that takes into account the diversity of those businesses. We're going to be expanding some of our current tools, such as our newsletter, by making it more of a training venue in terms of the way we get messages out, how we're able to have firms become more competitive in doing business with us. We're going to be conducting more in-depth training programs in terms of our business forums, going in and showing firms about how to be, not sort of like we were just talking about in the last section about panels and interviews. How do you go about if you're going before of the district to go for contract, you are able to actually be better prepared to be more competitive. And yes, education is the foundation on which we will build the success of the program. Education both internally and externally. Next slide. As we start construction, our above ground, we must take into account various external and internal elements. And this will be done through various assessments. And in terms of those assessments, we are looking to use an outside consultant to help us in that and doing some of those. Since professional services allow more flexibility, it is serving as our ground floor for kicking our project off. We have reviewed using our diversity lens and updated our rating criteria for proposal evaluation. We're also piloting an SBE first for contract awards of $250,000 or less. So those projects would be set aside for small businesses in terms of when those contracts come up. The one thing that I know, since I was just here with you a couple months ago, what's going to be different this time around in terms of our contracting diversity efforts is that I feel like the board is more proactive by its push for the DEI strategic plan with applicable resources, the public outcry and pressure on the need to do more for the underserved, stronger commitment from the GM and SM and our senior management team, and the incorporation of our new tool in terms of the equity toolkit that has been adopted all across the district for all of our goals to give a more global approach and not just for our contracting now effort. So I think a universal cultural change is really going to push us to the next level. And that's why I think right now we're going to see changes that take place in terms of our contracting outreach. Next slide. I think I'm available for questions or comments at this time. Thank you.
Thank you for the work that you do, Beverly. It's well noted within the community.
Absolutely.
And like they say, so it's going to get better with time. So look, so stay tuned. We got a lot planned and I'm looking forward to this new effort as part of the plan. So
Beverly, you have high
hopes. Full force.
Beverly, you have high hopes.
I have high hopes.
Right, thank you. If there are no other questions, we're going to move to Pillar 5. Pillar 5 is going to be led by our Diversity Inclusion Officer, Janella Sambor-Wallace.
Thank you, Derry. Good morning, directors. Our last strategic pillar is social responsibility. As an agency servicing 1.4 million customers over an expansive service area, our operations have significant impacts on the community. Accordingly, we have the social responsibility to ensure the fair and equitable distribution of environmental, economic, or social benefits for all people, regardless of race, age, culture, income status, or geographic location. Next slide, please. Under this pillar, we have two strategic goals. The first, strategic goal 10, is community engagement. Social responsibility means we must engage with the community in our decision-making processes. The key desired outcome for this strategic goal is for that those most impacted by current or historical social challenges or inequities have a say in designing and implementing solutions. We have 4 5-year objectives for this strategic goal, which I will go into detail on the next few slides. Next slide, please. The first objective, 10.1, is for the community engagement pilot project to apply our equity toolkit to our current community engagement processes. The next objective, 10.2, has 4 action items. We will review the district's current community engagement plan to determine how EBMUD currently engages with the underrepresented communities within our service area. And then following that, enhance our external community engagement plan to ensure the district is engaging and consulting with our community partners to learn more about their needs, interests, concerns, and expectations. We aim to standardize the public participation process for all departments to ensure that the underrepresented communities are being included in our decision-making processes. We are currently in the process of identifying the demographics of our service area for the underrepresented communities so that we can ensure that we will be conducting inclusive targeted outreach. And in keeping with the inclusive public outreach efforts and understanding that our customers and communities have limited English proficient abilities, we also plan to research current language assistance efforts at the district for opportunities to develop a language assistance plan or LAP. Internal departments are currently meeting to best identify the needs for the overall development of a district lab that will apply to the entire district. Finally, we plan to partner with internal stakeholders on messaging EBMUD's DEI efforts to the public and our customers via all media platforms, including social media. Next slide, please. Objective 10.3 is to engage with Indigenous and tribal communities to explore opportunities for enhanced partnerships to aid in the cultural sensitivity for our current work processes. Our action item here is to research and partner with local Indigenous tribal communities to explore respectful and appropriate incorporation of practices such as land acknowledgement. Next slide, please. Our last objective for strategic goal 10 is career awareness programming. Given the environmental impact that EBMUD has, we want to engage with the youth community early on to help form environmentally conscious citizens who understand the importance of the environmental, social, and economic impacts of our water and wastewater industry. Additionally, we want them to be exposed to the areas of science, technology, engineering, arts and math, or STEAM, since these jobs are so vital to our agency. Our actions are to identify opportunities to coordinate efforts between the district's K-12 education plan, which is currently led by Public Affairs, and our affirmative action program under the Diversity and Inclusion Office, particularly for those occupations and job groups with diversity challenges or goals. Lastly, we will develop and implement a targeted educational outreach strategy to attract and encourage the K-12 groups and post-secondary students who are historically underrepresented in STEAM and other occupations related to waste and wastewater. Next slide, please. Strategic Goal 11 focuses on environmental justice, or EJ. I want to note that the district does have environmental justice embedded in our sustainability policy and currently does engage the public for required public participation, such as for the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. But this pillar is really for us to explore how we can go beyond the minimum compliance requirements. The key desired outcome for the strategic goal is so that customers, ratepayers, and citizens are connected and informed of the environmental, social, and economic benefits and risks in their communities and are engaged in the public decision-making processes. We have 3 5-year objectives here, which I'll go into in the next slides. Next slide, please. Objective 11.1 focuses on the Capital Improvement Program pilot project, given the great scopes and impacts of this project. Our action here is to implement an equity toolkit pilot project where we can develop an equity-informed process to incorporate EJ and social responsibility principles into the CIP. The CIP pilot project team is currently engaged and in the process of identifying projects to apply the equity toolkit. Next slide, please. Objective 11.2 has 2 action items for the EJ process. The first is to tailor an equity toolkit for departments to make standardized equity-informed EJ and socially responsible decisions. As action item 2, departments will consult with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture on the project planning process to ensure that EJ decisions are made consistently across the district. And our last objective, 11.3, focuses on our climate action plan, given the major impacts of the climate-related changes on the communities and our industry. Our action item here is to review EBMUD's overall climate action plan and policy to ensure that future planning efforts for the district's water supply assesses the impacts on underrepresented communities and that these communities are informed and participating in the decision-making process. Next slide. So that concludes my section, and we have a couple minutes for questions.
Director Young.
Yeah, if you could, you don't need to go back to the slide, but I'm struggling a little bit with how we seem to have defined environmental justice. Environmental justice is basically disproportionate impact
Mhm.
on communities of color and rectifying those. It's about repairing and mitigating and addressing, not about process. It is about process, but it's about way more than process. It's making sure that our actions do not add to, and where possible, improve and restore the damage that our past activities have done in those communities. So I'm feeling a little bit like this doesn't quite, it's a little bit too flowery for me. Yeah, it's a little bit too flowery.
So Director Young, you're absolutely right that you do, for the environmental justice, the corrective actions, if there are impacts that are made, decisions that are made, and then we go back and have to look back and mitigate. But you know, when we look at the definition of environmental justice for our sustainability policy, we're really trying to go back and apply the equity lens proactively from the beginning of the process, the planning process. So working with the projects from the beginning, as they plan, identify projects, identify the communities that these projects may impact. And like you said, with the corrective actions and the mitigations, even identifying those early on and also getting public input on that. We really want to engage the community. You don't know what the impacts or how you need that public input during the entire project planning process. So that way, you know, we can prevent any of these measures and have to go back and mitigate.
I'm all there about the prospective work. What I'm not all there about is the retrospective work, because it doesn't seem like we necessarily are trying to figure that out. And I know that might be a deep hole to dig, but especially since we're looking at our 150th or 100th year anniversary and the like, that we should try to identify those areas where we have had in the past a disproportionate impact on communities of color in our operations and actions.
Yes, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Director Chan to address an important element of that. Was it?
No, Director Young, I think you bring up a good point. I think this is something you brought up before, and we want to make sure this is important feedback as we move forward with this plan to incorporate not just, I think, what Janella talked about going prospectively, but also looking retrospectively. So this is important feedback for us as we finalize the plan. So we'll take a look at how we can incorporate that feedback into the plan.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've completed this portion of it, and we want to give you a couple of additional pieces of information, and then we want to open up, give you our next steps, and then open up for any additional questions that you have. And that next step is really about our evaluation process. As has been mentioned, none of this work makes any difference unless we make an impact. And so the impact in terms of how we address updating and changes to the plan and making course corrections as we're going forward is we will be doing an annual evaluation for the first 2 years of the program. While this is a 5-year plan, we're not planning to just, we're not operating as was just mentioned with a thought that we have created every answer to every issue that we're addressing. But we do intend that we're going to make adjustments to the plan over the next 2 years to continue to focus and look at priorities as we're going forward. Beyond that, we will have a biennial evaluation period that we'll continue to look at different things. But one of the most critical things that we did mention that really is important, and I really want to make sure that we all kind of look at this the same way, and that is the importance of this DEI dashboard, because that dashboard is what we need to use as a management tool for making decisions. Again, to be able to identify things much more real time, as was noted earlier, that we're not working from data that's 2 years old or a year old, but both staff and the board can be apprised of where we are at any given point in terms of how we're doing. The second is, as was mentioned in the plan, is our employee survey data, to continue to implement surveys to catch the pulse of our employees, to look at our inclusivity, to look at how we're doing in terms of being an employer of choice. Next is a regular evaluation of the toolkits. This is we're implementing toolkits, and right now we've been working with the auditor's office and with governmental affairs in terms of trying to customize a toolkit for their particular usages. And we want to continue to evaluate how that toolkit is working, how effective it is in working toward changing our policy and culture in the organization. Then feedback from our work teams, as our teams are working on projects, is to, again, have the voice of those employees who are part of our governance structure, have their voices heard. And then naturally, we want to continue to get feedback from the board, which we will continue to do in monthly presentations to Ledge HR as we're going forward. So we're looking at these being kind of our evaluation processes. And again, really focusing on our metrics and how we're doing in terms of progress is going to be important. Our next steps will be to finalize based on feedback we receive from you so far and whatever other additional feedback that you provide. We're going to give you back a finalized product in February. We're going to continue to evaluate resource needs and looking at, again, what resources do we require in order to continue to move forward. And then our deliverables are, number one, this 2-year action plan that's in this plan, and our DEI dashboard and metrics are high priorities on kind of our next steps here. And then finally, we're going to continue in-plan implementation. As I mentioned, we have actually technically 24 items that are in action right now. We're going to continue to work on these as we go forward. Again, with a focus on how can we make the greatest impact to continue to work on these issues throughout the district. So with that in mind, I want to open up to any additional questions that any of you board members have today.
Lisa, I wonder, before we go to board feedback, if we just kind of check to see if there's any public comment that we have.
At the moment, I don't have anyone for public. Okay, I have one hand, and I'll let you know if others go up. So do you want to take public comment first?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Yvette Rivera, you should be able to unmute your mic. Yvette, your mic, okay, and your 3 minutes will start now.
Hi, I'm not going to take 3 minutes. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate all of the questions and feedback that I heard from Director Lisa McIntosh and Director Marguerite Young. Sometimes I feel like these strategic plans are just like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak, where they're just set up to camouflage all the racism, misogyny, and discrimination at EBMUD. I hope that those two women really continue to play a big part in challenging the past, the present, and what's going to happen in the future. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mark Carradine. Mark, you should be able to unmute your mic. And your 3 minutes will start now.
Well, it'd be great to have more than 3 minutes because I have 32 years of information I would like to share. But I'm not gonna belabor my point or the message I need to give to the board, and that is, it takes a lot of courage to speak out, especially on subjects that are very difficult. And I watch people as they struggle to talk about these types of things. I see it here today. This process is not rosy, and it's not meant to be rosy. It's meant to get to the core of the problem, right? Or we should say the crux of the problem. In my 32 years, I have lived multiple careers here at the district. I left school at Cal and I came here to work because my uncle presented it as a way that I can financially support myself and at the same time finish with my education. But when I got here, I encountered systemic racism. And it was only until after I had received my bachelor's degree that, although I performed very well, never had any discipline, always had good appraisals, very good at what I do, I never promoted to a water distribution crew foreman. That was given to nothing but white guys. And that's the reality of it. But the difference between me and most other people is that I speak my mind. And I found, contrary to having the courage to speak, is that when you speak your mind, you are marginalized and isolated. I have spoke about the hiring process at the district for a long time and how there is no community. I guess you would say an equity lens. But whenever I share my voice, I'm no longer included in the conversation. I have been very patient with my time here at the district. I've been a part of the values team. I share that in my letter to you. I've been a part of every process. But what I have no tolerance for is racism. It is wrong. And Director Mellon, although I respect you, I have a lot of respect for you. I do not agree that just because a manager's position, anybody can manage. A division manager needs to understand its staff. It needs to understand the work that its staff is performing to be able to lead that division to where it needs to be, to give it an identity, to give it a voice, to bring somebody from a totally different environment and not know anything of it. That's wrong. I have been here for 32 years again, and I have watched managers step out of their comfort zone and not do well. Is it wrong for me to say that I see incompetence? Is it wrong for me to say that the Peter principle applies to some of these individuals that are hired into management? I mean, anyone can grab statistics and give you data that's going to tell you what you want to hear. But the reality is what is happening. I'm not the only voice out there, but I'm probably one of the only courageous voices. You know, in a couple of months, I'm probably going to be gone and retire. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I will say this. I have made my career here at the district what I wanted it to be, despite the opposition that I received as a plumber, promoted into supervision, and have shined, have left my imprint on this agency. When you see vehicles drive down the street and you have images and a narrative about what we do, that's my idea, okay? Our training program for our plumber twos, that's my idea. There's a lot of ideas that I bring, okay? But what I did not understand is that once I got into supervision, that I would have to be faced with another level of discrimination. What I'm about to say is not disrespectful. Engineers, they're talented individuals. But when we talk about diversity, it is the only thought and the only leadership we have. When you have 4 engineers on a panel, what do they hire? Similar to me, an engineer. It is an insult, and I'm totally offended to devalue my contributions, my skill set, and my knowledge, and what I have contributed to this organization. But I don't like the theater of talking in front of the board. But you know what? We have programs. We have some good programs, but they're in name only because there's no execution behind it. And Derry, I'll feel remiss if I did not say this. When we were doing the resolution, when Director Young wanted to put murder of George Floyd, but we decided not to, because we wanted to ask forgiveness, to be truthful, that we thought we would offend people. Well, you know what? I was wholeheartedly offended that I know that man was murdered and we could not tell the truth about that.
Mark, can you please
Okay.
wrap up your comments?
I'm going to wrap up my comments. All I wanted to say is that I'm still optimistically cautious, or cautiously optimistic, that we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to be courageous, and we're going to identify where we need to make those changes. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for your comments and your thoughtfulness and the feedback that you're giving. I think, as we grapple with these issues, we recognize the challenge of it and really appreciate your courageousness and those of others who have pointed out things that are not always easy to look at. So thank you. Lisa. Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have any? I don't see any other hands raised. So
There are no other hands for public comment.
yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Mark, thank you for your comments. I know it took courage to step out of your comfort zone to talk to us today, but I really appreciate your comments and your forthrightness and your service here at the district. I believe you weren't treated well. Where do I begin? So let's start with this huge plan, this huge program. How much staff do we need to see this through? Do we have sufficient resources? Are we planning to have sufficient resources to make this happen? Otherwise, it's just going to die on the vine, like many other projects. So that's my first question.
Let me take that first, Director McIntosh. I'll let Derry add to this, but I've been having conversations with Derry, and at the Legislative HR Committee, you might recall that I also mentioned that during our mid-cycle, we'll be looking at bringing additional staff. One of the things that we've identified is there is a need for some additional staff, especially because there are opportunities right now that we just really shouldn't be waiting for. So we will be coming to the mid-cycle. We're looking at the staffing and share with you what our plan is for additional staff to support Derry's efforts, so it doesn't, as you say, die on the vine, but that we do take advantage of these opportunities now and not wait because of resource issues. And I know this has been something you've been bringing up many times. So in the next few months, we'll be having this discussion with the board.
All right, thank you. Lastly, and I think this should go on a Leg HR committee agenda, and that's board appointments. And when the board, when it's our job to appoint an employee, I think we should be privy to more than just a one-page introduction of the employee that's being recommended. If we are serious about this, and we only have a small window, and that's just board appointees, and there aren't many, but I want to have every piece of information that brought that recommendation before the board. And I think we should have that information other than just a one-page introduction of that employee. So I'd like, Clifford, hopefully that to go on a future Leg HR committee agenda so we can sort of flush it out because it makes sense.
I'll make sure that happens.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Beverly, go ahead.
Beverly, your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to say two things. I wanted to say amen to Mark's comment, but when Director McIntosh asked me about if there's hope, if I feel like there's hope, because Mark had 32, so I have 35. And so the thing is that there's hope in terms of what I see happening now with the strategic plan and what the proposed outcome is in terms of trying to address some of the things that have appeared to be stacked decks in terms of our hiring process. So I see a way that that can be leveled out, and I hope to contribute to that in terms of some of the past things that I can hopefully relate to that Mark kind of referred to kind of make it so that it is more of a open process, that everybody has a chance at the table. But I also want to call attention to what Yvette had mentioned, and I wanted to reference her in terms of why there's also hope. She came to us a couple weeks ago about an issue about our tree trimming, and in terms of one of our women-owned firms who are no longer bidding on our contracts because of some new insurance requirements we have and other things, but she brought it to our attention. And so by staff getting involved and helping us to do more to identify diverse firms, I think is a positive. So I want to give her kudos in terms of helping us do our job better. So thank you, Yvette, again, for your help in working with us on that particular issue. So I just want to say hope is out there, and we're still, hope is alive, and we got the fight going. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. That's, I think, an important thing to keep in mind. Andy, you're next.
Thanks. I'd like to commend the staff for providing a very thorough and detailed plan. I think what's written here is on the right track. I support this going forward, but I agree with my colleagues that there are some meaningful details that are critical for follow through. One example that comes to my mind is, just to give an example, because I think you can follow this approach for really every one of these items, where we need to think through what are the next steps and what are the resources that we need. But I'll just give one is, contract equity. I think a strategy that we can invest more resources in is looking at opportunities to match prime contractors with diverse subs. I think that's a program that we could do more with, and we should do, we should have a careful evaluation program and think it through. But I think that we can do more with that. But I would anticipate it takes resources. So I'd like to see more of that kind of thinking in the future. So that depth and detail at the time of evaluation will be very important. So I just wanted to provide that overall outlook. One detailed comment that I'd like to add is the idea of ADR. Again, each of these items could have its own kind of presentation, and action plan. So I understand that we're looking at the plan as a whole, which is fine at this stage. I want to make sure that we are understanding that these ADR enhancements in the name of DEI should really be focused on restorative outcomes and not for, there is a lot of ADR out there, but when we're really using our DEI program to enhance ADR, it should be restorative and not for sweeping problems under the rug. So I just wanted to say that. Altogether, I'm glad that we've supported this program and support continuing our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Bill, you're next. Bill, you're on mute.
Helps to be heard, huh? I guess there are a myriad of things that we could talk about as we conclude today, but I would especially mention the fact that EBMUD is center stage now in terms of all of the actions that are going on, both the social climate, hiring, services, everything in environmental justice has focused in on us because we are a model agency. Here we are talking about internally some of the distractions from that hold us back in terms of being able to get into the mix of things and make a difference. And I'm just hoping that we continue to focus on the good things we've done, letting the world know that, especially when you have a drought hanging over you. And we're pushing for change. Personally, I thought 5 years was too long. The public needs to see some things immediately. And I think, Beverly, you touched on it when you talked about bringing a minority contractor to the fore. But you've been doing that all the time. And that's why you gained the recognition you have externally to the world. I think lots of people don't know. John would remember, and I know Frank would remember, that up on the McCullamy, way up where our water comes from, we had some very environmentally sensitive things going on. You know, at one time, the intrusion on our water supply of the things that went into mining long before we were at Pardee threatened our main water source. And it came off federal lands. Well, we had a project that cleaned that all up, that took out all that material and replaced it so that it safeguarded our water supply. That was a mega operation. And I just think I'm singling that out to say, it's not the only one. We got many. And we need to keep holding those things up. And in our agency, we need to continue to push things forward that are recognizable as soon as we can. People expect change because we've got this wonderful opportunity to look at ourselves and to make a difference in the social arena, in the hiring arena, in the promotional arena, in the areas of expertise that we have. You know, nobody criticizes our wastewater program because it's the best in the nation. I'm saying we always find room for improvement, but we have to continually hold up the fact that we have outstanding things on the table. And we should use that opportunity while we have center stage to also improve on what we do as we go forward. More and more people are going to be looking at us as a result of our successes. And we have to make sure our successes don't get watered down as we go forward. And I say that because this whole program is designed to make us better and from within. And we should not lose that opportunity, nor should we string it out too long. And we got to plug the things that we do immediately in order to sustain a 5-year gap. 5 years is too long to wait for the results. If we're going to look for the results in 5 years, we're down to wash because they won't see the things we're doing currently. And I just wanted to say, Derek, you have a tremendous responsibility. Don't miss an opportunity to wave a flag or get the accomplishment up. And significant change is what people are looking for. We've invested in the department to give us that. And so you have an extra mile to go in order to get that out there. You're a trailblazer, believe it or not. And that's what we should be doing in this operation. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Bill. I want to take my comment time to reinforce what Bill said. My background tends to be campaigns where we move, within 6 months to 8 months to do a campaign, and it's wrapped up and gone, and hopefully we've accomplished our goal. So I always have a certain amount of impatience, but I agree, so totally and strongly with what Bill just said in terms of this is our moment. This is our moment to move and to make change. And some parts of this is a very complicated issue and a road to navigate that's very challenging. But I think there's some things that we know we're not moving fast enough about. We've heard that from Mark, and Lisa today has certainly pointed it out. And so we have to find those things that we can move quickly on, and those things we have to tease out a little bit more and make sure that we're moving everybody along at the same time. So we're not creating more conflict than we're easing. But it is a moment in time that I fear is already fading, and that we need to move as quickly as possible on this. So you have the board's attention. We have the purpose of this workshop today was to focus our attention on it. We have a framework for making decisions, but let's not use the entire 5 years to make the changes that we need to make, and that we all know that we need to make. So other board members, I want to take a quick look at the time, 11:15, but want to make sure everyone's had a chance to have a say on today's important topic. Marguerite, go ahead.
President Lenny, before
This is very
Director
briefly.
Young.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Director Young. I just wanted to let you know we have 2 hands for public comment after
Okay.
Director Young. No, after Director Young, and Director Coleman also has his hand up. We have 2 additional hands for public comment.
Okay, I don't want to add, I ask my questions in sequence. I just want to support the comments made by Lisa, Doug, and Director Patterson about moving expeditiously and about not underestimating the board's interest and accountability for making this plan real as any other pipe we put in the ground. I'll leave it at that.
All right, go ahead, John.
Thank you. I had to take myself off mute. I agree with the comments that have been made. And yeah, 5 years seems like a long time. It is a long time, put it that way. I have full belief in those who can take charge at the district dealing with these issues. We have institutional racism in this country, and at EBMUD, they need to be addressed upfront, head on, and we need to make sure that we're representing the people of this district in terms of opportunities, jobs, and growth. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Any other board members at this time? Otherwise, we'll end with comments from the public, and Clifford at the end, of course, wrapping up.
Okay.
Go ahead, Risha.
Thanks. Shaka Lee, I am going to unmute your mic. You should be able to unmute your mic, and your 3 minutes will start now.
I apologize. I lowered my hand. Someone already had spoke on what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Antonio Martinez.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to take just a couple of minutes to first of all applaud the people who spoke. It does take courage to speak in front of the board. It takes courage to speak about these difficult conversations, and ultimately, it's up to the board. I mean, as an elected official myself, I know that what I do for the board that I serve on is I give direction, and I have expectations, and I have to hold people accountable. So ultimately, it's the responsibility of the board to make sure that these things happen. I listened to the presentation today, just like so many others that I listened to over the past years that I've been here at the district. It's nothing but script. It becomes lip service if nothing happens. And unfortunately, I've witnessed a lot of that happening at the district. I've listened to a lot of meetings, a lot of strategic plans that we have here, and a lot of a lot of things that we have in name only, as Mark mentioned. So I do have an expectation, and I am optimistic, but it's ultimately in the hands of the board and what you all decide to do and how you hope to be accountable with this plan as it moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Clifford, you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, well, first, again, I also want to thank everyone who spoke publicly, as well as all the feedback from the board. We got some very good feedback across all the pillars. Some of the things I've heard too was to, again, make sure that this plan, as many of the directors have stated, that we do follow through on this, and that will require resources, which you will hear about in the upcoming months, as we've looked at this plan. Another thing I heard, I think, fairly clearly is, that although 5 years you say is too long, there are actions that we're going to be accomplishing within the 2 years, and to make sure that we, highlight those actions that we've accomplished so that it doesn't seem like it will take 5 years to get the first thing done. And then the other part I heard too was a lot of it is to focus on our internal employees. External is good too, but internal as well. And I think as Director Patterson mentioned, if you focus on the internal, a lot of the other things that we're focused on will follow as well. So we're going to take all of this feedback that you've provided, update the plan, and we'll bring this plan back to the board in February for adoption. And from there, we'll start, getting out with the employees to talk about the plan, as well as look at the resource needs in the mid-cycle budget, which will be coming up in a few months. So I'll just end by saying, this is a very challenging issue that we're working on, and I know why a lot of employees may be skeptical of what we're trying to accomplish, but this is something that we are focused on, and we have made changes, and we're continuing to make changes. But as I said at the very beginning, the hard work starts now. This in many ways was difficult to get to this point, but there's a lot of hard work ahead of us, and we're committed to making it happen.
All right, thank you, Clifford, and thank you all for putting this together and keeping this in front of us. With that, this meeting is adjourned.